Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week's theme of not rock or metal with the band the Kandinsky Effect. We're going to be checking out the track Somnambulist, which Kandinsky and Somnambulist, these just sound fun to say. Maybe they don't say, they feel so fun to say. Anyways, they're very cool words. I don't know what any of this actually means, though. Let's dive into this track, though, and see what they're bringing to the table today. I can't follow along with this. I thought we were alternating 7 and 8. That doesn't seem to be true. Love the sax tone, though. Bass sounds great underneath everything. The echo, the drone, an after image of the sax is an interesting touch. Yeah, that was 15. I don't know, man. There's something dark about all this, though. Ominous, maybe, might be a better word than dark. Very Slytherin with that sax line. Dude, the drummer, yeah, dude, it's starting to really take off. I'd love to know what key we're in. Alright, back to the intro. Very moody outro, the triplet feel. It's this push and pull. Yeah, dude, that's sick, man. Have we listened to Kandinsky Effect before? I feel like we have. Why did I push Spotify? I feel like we've heard them before. I don't know. I'm gonna have to check out more of this album though. The album's called it's called Somnambulist. Title track here. 2015, so a little over a decade old here. Came out in January 2015. Yeah, though, dude, this is good. All right, I gotta focus. We gotta talk about this in, you know, detail rather than me just fawning over it with, you know, less precise words. There's an interesting tonality to all of this, and I'm trying to pick up what it is, and I don't know. There's times when it feels chromatic because I can't place a harmonic sound to it at all. But it never hits a point where I'm like, oh, we're definitely in the chromatic scale because that has its own colorings too. And I never heard that in here. It's almost as if we are frequently moving between different chords that don't necessarily follow in more traditional progressions. And so this pocket of four notes might be chord A, and then this pocket of four notes is chord B, which is related to chord A, and then the third chord is chord C, but it's not related to the other two at all. It's kind of doing its own thing and introducing a new form, and then that takes us to D, which is also doing its own thing and not necessarily even following a rising and falling pattern of intensity that pulls back to a release. It just sort of is a new chord. And maybe that's how it's working, of why none of these harmonic ideas feel like they fit together into a more defined harmonic palette, but why it also doesn't feel chromatic. And for those who don't know what a chromatic element is or the chromatic scale, it is simply every note that we have available to us. If you grabbed a piano and just went from a white key to the black key next to it to the white key to the black key next to it and went all the way up for 12 notes, that would be a chromatic scale. It's just everything. No notes are excluded, so it kind of doesn't have a particular flavor to it, although playing all the notes together does have a feeling. But I don't get that here, and I find that to be really interesting because it turns the song harmonically into a track that I can follow along with at times. Specific groups of notes feel like they flow together, but those groups don't always naturally flow into another set. And it creates something that is both familiar and unfamiliar simultaneously. I think this can most clearly be heard in the B section, the sax solo part of this track. Which is kind of difficult to define because a lot of this song is the drums and bass doing some funky stuff and then a sax on top of that. So it's difficult for me to say, the solo section is where the sax took the spotlight. Like, no, the sax is always in the spotlight. But to me, there was a very clear moment where the drums shifted into standard 4/4, which we're going to touch on that later because the whole song's in 4/4. But anyways, it leans into a more standard 4/4, and the sax just starts these linear ideas. And that's why when we came back at the end of the track, about a minute and a half to go, and I said, oh, we're back to the A section, we returned back to what the first minute of the track sounded like. It had a distinct melodic idea, a distinct hook, and a distinct atmosphere as far as how the instruments were layered and what they were doing. But I totally don't blame you if you thought the entire 4.5 minutes just sounded like one long run-on idea, because yeah, I get that. It kind of is. On the surface level, it's very similar from start to finish. but I'd say somewhere between minute 1.5 and 3.5 in there is the solo section. And this is where I think the sax was the most harmonically diverse and the more difficult to follow along with, though, again, like I mentioned, in spurts, little pockets of time, I got what it was doing, but it just never went where I expected in these pockets. It's interesting because usually I would talk about a melody not going where I expect, but if you break a melody down into like quarters or bars, each bar feels right. It's just the bars don't feel like they should be in this order. It's a very interesting way to write a melody line, and I think it's pretty cool. I wonder if the bass also plays into this as well, since the bass is providing a lot of harmonic information, although I found, at least to my ear, most of the parts of the melody and harmony that clashed with my expectations came from the sax. But it could also be that the sax sounded strange against the bass, and my ear just naturally assumed the bass was the foundation, that it was properly laying things out, and it was the sax deviating. Regardless, there's some really interesting ideas between the two of them harmonically. It creates a track that, like I mentioned, feels as I expect it to be, but also unfamiliar. But there's also the emotional side of it too, which I feel this entire track just feels a little eerie, a little off-putting, a little scary, maybe even. There's an ominous element to it. And I think part of that is also just the uncertainty, where I feel like I know where I am, but I'm lost. There's some landmarks, but I don't remember this other thing being next to this landmark. And when I come back to this landmark again, there's different things surrounding it. So I'm seeing things that are familiar, but it doesn't make me feel like I understand where I'm at any more than if I were completely lost. It's a really fun feeling to have while listening to music. While listening to music's key. I don't ever want to feel that when I'm like out on the road. It'd be a nightmare. Which I guess nightmare is a good term for this, since I said it sounds a bit ominous. The drum work in here is phenomenal. There are some really bizarre choices occasionally used, and part of this is why it was difficult for me to follow along with the core rhythm. There certainly is a 15-beat phrase in the A section. What I didn't notice, because it's such a long idea, is that there's also a 17-beat idea after it. And so what would happen is I would hear the 15, I'd be like, oh, okay, well, 15, that's alternating 7 and 8. And rhythmically, it would line up with that really well. We'd get 7, it would feel like we lurch into the next bar. Actually, we'd get 8, and then we have 7, and then it feels like we're lurching into the next bar just a beat early. That's a really clear idea that we've probably chopped a beat off somewhere. And then I would hear the 8 again. Yeah, we're on board. And then there wouldn't be. It would feel like there's an extension. I'm expecting the next bar to come in a beat early, and it doesn't. And then I get lost. And it wasn't until returning back to the A section that I caught on to this. We're alternating 15 and 17. Which does add up to 32, which is clearly divisible by 4. We're actually playing around with bar lines here. The entire A section is in 4/4, and a majority of it feels like it, but some sections don't. The way phrases end are sometimes cut off a little bit or extended by a little bit. It's probably easier to count it as something like 8, 7, 8, 9. Since that's what the rhythmic feel is of it. But if you count it all in 4/4, it is eventually going to line back up every 32 beats. And the drummer does a lot of interesting things within this. For instance, we have the 8 and then the 7. And then the first 4 beats of the next 8 is sort of an extended idea, and beat 5 feels like we're starting on 1 again. So we actually have a weird misdirection right here. And that threw me off a couple times too, because I would perceive that 5 to be a 1. Oh, we didn't end the beat early. We actually extended out 4 extra beats. That's what it sounds like. But still on paper, I think I'd probably write this in 4/4 for the consistency of it. To have one time signature across the whole thing. And like I said there with the drummer, the sax, the bass, they don't really play around with this fake out thing where it feels like we're hitting 1 on 5. That's strictly a drummer idea. The drummer does a lot of really fun ideas throughout this track in order to play around with time feel, of altering where phrases feel like they're starting, of when it feels like we're shifting ideas or moving into a repetition of some sort. They also play around with rhythmic flow, and there is a general funness. Not a very descriptive word. There is a fun quality, though, to the drum work in here, particularly when we get into the solo section and the drummer begins to play with time feel. We're still in 4/4 for the entirety of the solo, and for the most part, we have downbeats, sharp accents on beat 1s all over the place. It never feels like we're starting early or extending ideas, but the drummer does like to play around with polyrhythms in this section, introducing triplet feels all throughout this place in order to make the song feel like it's stretching out and squashing, while the bass and the saxophone are playing in this straight 4/4 time. The drummer is manipulating the time feel. It feels like we're constantly slowing down and speeding up throughout this track. It's a push and pull going on that none of the other instruments are really participating in too much. The triplet feel does get picked up by the bass for a little bit after a few repetitions of it, and I do like that. I don't know if it was written that way, which it certainly could be, but it also feels like a natural evolution that would happen live too. One of the cool things about playing live in jazz groups is, especially during solo sections, the conversational element of it. Depending on how long you've played with people or just how skilled they are, but certainly playing with people more, allowing them to get familiar with your style, you can begin to introduce rhythmic ideas or repeated patterns, and the drummer or the bass may chime in, doing some call and response or lining up their rhythm with yours, feeling out, oh, he's building into something, let me play along with them, build this energy up, and then, the beginning of the next 16-bar phrase, we'll drop it back down, right? It's this conversational component of live improvisation that feels like what's happening here with the bass leaning into what the drummer's been starting here. It creates something that feels flowy and improvised more than composed, and I really love that element. And part of that may just be that it's also a jazzy track, which puts my mind already in that position of maybe this is actually improvised rather than all pre-composed. But the drum work, dude, coming back to it, gets tasty, man. There are so many really good polyrhythmic ideas in here that just subdivides time up into, dude, it's the tension, right? Between what the 4/4 is, what the bass is laying down, versus maybe the 5 against 4, the 3 against 4 that the drummer's pushing in there. And then it's not just like 5 beats on a snare or something. It's like all over the kit, right? Creating this melodic polyrhythmic approach. It just sounds so good. And the sax is playing off of this with its harmonic tension. And it's just building. I mean, the end of the solo section coming back into the A is such an intricate, tight feeling without ever introducing elements like, noise or compression or distortion. It's that same sort of tension and anxiety that noise rock is really good at doing, but from a textured perspective. And they're accomplishing it here on a more compositional one. And it's just, the release back into the A section sounds so good. I want to take a moment to look up what Somnambulist is. There's no lyrics here, so I'm going to see if I can't use that as a springboard to discuss maybe what this track is trying to do or say. As I mentioned earlier, it just kind of comes across as a bit ominous and indecipherable, possibly at times. I think there even is some microtonality in it, very small amounts, but I feel like the sax is just making their notes a little flatter at times in order to introduce some of that. But I don't have quantifiable data to back that up. It's more of a gut feeling just based off the tones they were playing. But I don't have much else to go on other than I felt lost and a little scared while listening to the track. So let me look that up. All right, first of all, I looked over at Bandcamp. The top review on it, this album does not have a weak track, is uniformly great, and is constantly on repeat. There's no reason to shut it off or change selections. It's that good. After listening to this track, I believe that review, and I am totally looking forward to checking out this album. 12 songs on it, all in the same range of, 3 to 4 minutes. If any of the tracks are even half as good as this one, it's going to be a solid album. Now, a somnambulist is a person who is subjected to somnambulism. I hate descriptions like that. It's a terrible definition to a word. Anyways, it is someone who sleepwalks. And I was thinking about that in the context of the track. And is it weird I kind of got that? I'm going to have to squint a little bit and read between the lines of what I said, but I don't think it is too far of a stretch. That feeling in the dark, well, okay, I never used that word. I mentioned feeling lost and a bit scared, feelings of ominous elements. I think you can attribute that to sleepwalking. Maybe not necessarily sleepwalking in the moment, but I think the concept of sleepwalking can be a little ominous. The body kind of going on autopilot as the brain dreams something unrealistic and the body simply follows along. Again, it's not exactly what I described, but it's a lot closer than I ever would have expected. So I find that to be pretty cool, and I think they did a good job of capturing this feeling of someone who sleepwalks. Maybe not necessarily the action of sleepwalking, but being on the outside of that, trying to speak to someone who is not awake, but are certainly operating, walking around, doing things. These are my thoughts. The Kandinsky Effect's Somnambulist. What did you think of this track? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own opinion, perspective, or even take on this track? What did you get out of it? Let me know. Put that stuff down in the comments section along with anything else that you would like to add. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. No, above that is in the description box, a link to Linktree. It takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. We're going to check out an entire album. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.